So, hello and welcome to CGEn's podcast series, The Synapsis. My name is Naveed Aziz, and I serve as the Chief Executive Officer of CGEn, Canada's national platform for genome sequencing and analysis. I'm thrilled to welcome you to our podcast series, which aims to bring together experts from across Canada to discuss the Canadian life science ecosystem, the current state of the affairs, and ideas of the future direction of science in Canada. So why the name Synapsis? Well, as you all know, synapsis is a cell biology term and is the event where pairing of homologous chromosomes occur during meiosis. This is also the time when crossover events happen. CGEn Synapsis podcast is just that. It's coming together of like-minded individuals, exchange of knowledge, and hopefully giving rise to new thoughts and new ideas. So today, as our first guest speaker on the podcast is Gordon McCauley. Gordon, thank you for joining us today. According to Gordon's Twitter profile, he's a dad, a husband, a healthcare business person, and an investor. Gordon is the president and CEO at Admare Bio Innovations, based in Vancouver, British Columbia. Gordon also serves as the chair of CGEn Board of Directors. If you're interested in following Gordon after hearing our discussion today, he can be found at on Twitter at GC McCauley. As president and CEO at Admare Bio Innovations, Gordon is no stranger to the life science sector in Canada. He has served as a director of a number of private and publicly traded companies, including a number of Admare portfolio and subsidiary companies. Gordon earned his BA in political science from McMaster University, an MBA with honors from IMD Business School in Zola, Switzerland, and holds the Institute of Corporate Director certification from Rotman School of Business at the University of Toronto. So Gordon, before we get into our discussion, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about yourself, mainly your career path and how you ended up in the life science sector in Canada.
Well, let me start by saying thanks for inviting me, Naveed. I was just thrilled to spend a little bit of time talking with you because the leadership that you're providing to CGEn and to the ecosystem, I think, is extraordinary. So it was an easy invitation to accept. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Look, I ended up in this industry a little bit by good planning, a little bit by good luck. So as you may know, as you do know, I started out my career in politics, which I think is a terrific training ground in the early days of one's career, as long as you don't hang around too long. I had the good fortune of having that decision made for me. I didn't think it was good fortune at the time, but as the fellow I was working for at the time liked to say, we left politics for health reasons, which are that the people got sick of us, so they threw us out, and caused me to think about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And I decided deliberately I wanted to be in business. And so the first step was basically anybody that would have me. And then I thought kind of seriously about what really mattered to me. And for me personally, I have what I like to call the genetic default of the public service gene. I need to be doing good in the world. And I certainly like to do well, but I need to be doing good. And so that's kind of what led to healthcare more broadly. And then by a series of serendipitous events, I ended up in life sciences, venture capital, and then subsequent to that, running a number of our portfolio companies. So it's, as I say, a path of a little bit of good planning and a lot of good luck, I suspect.
Thanks, Gordon. Yeah, I think it's a lot of good planning, a lot of hard work, but thank you for being so humble about that. Okay, so in the next maybe 15, 20 minutes, I'd like to focus on a few key questions, just kind of to get our audience and our listener a sense of the Canadian life science ecosystem. And with your experience and your background, as you just talked about, and what you do today, I think people will be very interested in knowing what your thoughts on some of these key topics and so to speak in Canadian life science sector are. So let me start by asking this. So Canada is well positioned internationally when it comes to the quality and quantity of its academic research. In the past, this has not translated into a number of homegrown solutions and innovations as one would expect, right? Especially when compared to some of the other nations. So what are your thoughts on the current Canadian innovation climate? Where are we now?
So you're a data person, so let's start with some data. Unquestionably, Canada has an extraordinary research enterprise. The combination of its research universities, research institutes, CHR, NSERC, whatever, you name them all. They are extraordinary enterprises. And when you look at the data, Canada consistently punches well above its weight in terms of the relative output of those organizations on any metric you want to choose, whether it is citation metrics or intellectual property metrics, whatever. We do an extraordinary job, and that's it. And that's credit due to the people who work in those enterprises, the scientists themselves, and to be fair to generations of public policy leaders who have made the extraordinary financial investments over the course of generations. As you say, what we've done a lousy job of over that period of time is translating that into a sustained industry. And, again, look at the data. In Canada, this industry represents, I think it's 0.45% of the GDP of the country, compared to about 7.5% in the US. It doesn't really matter. The delta is huge, both in percentage terms and financial terms. And so I think there has been a question, and interestingly, I'll give our colleagues in public policy credit again. About 6 years ago, they started making fairly significant investments in organizations like ours. And let me be clear, I'm not taking credit. I'm saying we came along at a moment where we could help guide some things. But the government of Canada made what turned out to be an $80 million investment 6 years ago in our work. They've recently re-upped it to another $92 million investment. And my colleagues have been able to focus on that extraordinary research enterprise and then figuring out what are the key pieces we need to do to live up to what we see as our vision, which is Canadian life sciences leading the world. And we kind of think about it as three core pillars. We need to build companies, we need to build ecosystems, and we need to build talent. And they're all interrelated. The companies need the space, and they need the people to fill the space and fill the companies, and so on. It's a bit of a virtuous circle. But what's interesting, Naveed, when you focus on those sorts of things, you start to see some pretty compelling outputs. So, we've been able to help 25 companies along the way. Those companies today are worth about $3 billion. They've raised almost $1.5 billion of real risk capital. They employ about 1,000 people today. So when you focus on how do you really provide those infrastructure supports to really help make companies succeed, it's extraordinary what you can do. And if you think about 5-6 years ago, one of the peculiar things about Canada relative to every other pharma or biotech market in the world is we were the only advanced life sciences market in the world without a domestic research-based anchor company. And here we are today. And look at the ecosystem. We've got Accelerate, we've got Repair, we've got Zymeworks, we've got Bellis, we've got Aurinia. The number is actually probably 12 or 14, either that meet the definition of anchor or are putative anchors on the real path to getting there. Yeah. And again, I'm not taking credit for that, even on behalf of my colleagues, which I'm happy to do. I'm simply saying when you focus efforts in a way that can really be commercially relevant, you can see those outcomes happen. So, look, there remains a lot of work to do. There remains more. We need to maintain that focus, but I think the output to this point has been extraordinary. And at some point we can talk about the talent front too, because I know that's an area near and dear to your heart, and incredibly important to us as well. But so all of that's a long-winded way of saying, look, we have this extraordinary research enterprise. If we really focus our efforts in a commercially relevant way, we can have a similarly extraordinary industry that is sustainable over time.
Thanks, Gordon. And yeah, absolutely. I think for well, you touched up on talent, and with my kind of 15 years of training in the UK and the last decade here in Canada, one thing I still is extraordinary to me is the Canadian talent. When I moved here to Canada, I was in awe of the Canadian talent. I mean, I'm not dissing the UK talent, but amazing talent. And that's when the question arose, like, we have all this talent, what's happening? What's support? But you're absolutely right. In the last few years, we've really turned things around just with the focus. Everybody has really focused on getting this done, and you see the difference. So absolutely.
Well, and I'd also say you can apply the same kind of logic as I'm proselytizing about to talent as I'm suggesting we have and should continue to do around building companies, because right. Yes, we have extraordinary talent, and it's axiomatic. If you're going to have extraordinary research enterprises, of course you're going to have extraordinary talent, but you also need to have the commercial focus of that talent. So how do we help that extraordinary talent think of it? And so again, I mean, speaking from our part, and there are lots of other actors in the ecosystem doing all sorts of incredibly important things. We again focused on what are the key things that are going to make a difference. So one of the things we identified early on was the need for executive leadership talent, because if you don't have a sustainable ecosystem, almost by definition, you don't have those executive leaders who can lead companies or important organizations. And so, we built this the Admari Academy Executive Institute, which has been an extraordinary success, and is really helping lead the way in developing the leaders of the companies that we want to create and the future in the ecosystem. Similarly, one of the interesting things to us was, again, when you look at the data, the Council of Canadian Academies did a terrific report a year or two ago called Degrees of Success. And one of the things that was quite interesting to us in that report is that of the PhD graduates in Canada, 25% end up working in industry. That to me says there's an extraordinary opportunity there to say, okay, how do we identify the skills that are necessary to help those folks and apply and have more of them apply their expertise in industry. So that's how we created this bioinnovation scientist program that looks at recently graduated PhDs and master students and says, okay, you've got this terrific expertise. How do we help you apply that expertise in a commercially relevant way? And that program has hundreds of graduates now, and like all of our programs, we look very closely at where those folks end up going. So in all of our programs, we have more than 500 alumni today, 95% who work in industry. So we know that's working. And again, I like talking about my colleagues and the work they do, but it's just an example that is replicated in other organizations and other parts of the ecosystem of ways that you can really focus and make a difference.
Yeah, and it's absolutely true. I mean, the number of times, especially young graduates, come and ask the question of what options do I have from, apart from academia, and with your training program, they have a vehicle to go and explore and see if industry is for them, or if they're industry minded, they have a vehicle to go and get trained to get ready. Because we all know that the academic world is not. It's designed to make an academic out of you. It's not designed to set you up for industry. We all know that.
Yeah, and look, I'm a business person, but so I agree with what you're saying. Except there's no judgment to that. I mean, we need high quality academics just as badly as we need high quality business people.
Absolutely.
But if we want to have a sustained and sustainable industry, we've got to focus on those commercial talents and make sure that they can be applied.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. So, okay, let's change gears a little bit, and we talked about where Canada is and how we've changed things around in the last few years. But I think one thing, to me at least, that's kind of been underpinning all this is collaborations and alignment with our partners. And you talked about coming together of federal agencies and all the funding coming to us. So it really has been a collaborative, true Canadian fashion, right?
Yeah,
it really has
100%.
been a collaborative fashion. So it is very clear that national collaborations and alignment among partners are required for Canada to compete globally in the life science sector. But what is Canada doing currently to enable that? I mean, you're very close to that. So tell us a little bit more about what's happening on that front.
So first, I agree with you 100%. Actually, let me pause and just say, the way you started that question, we are making great progress. But let's not declare victory, because we're not there yet. We've got a lot of work that remains to do, and I'm really excited about what we're seeing. And I know you would agree with me, but we're making great progress. But I think it's really dangerous to feel like we can do a victory lap right now, because we can't. We've got a long way still to go before this, at least from the industry perspective, we are a sustainable ecosystem.
Absolutely.
With respect to global collaborations, well, first of all, you said it. It's one of those wonderfully innate parts of being Canadian, about being this geographic experiment that makes no damn sense, right? You take 38 or 9 million people today and spread them across a 100-kilometer wide band along the U.S. border is just nutty. If you were a business school student, you'd be laughed out of the classroom for proposing to do this. And of course, in a wonderfully Canadian way, we found over with 100 and some odd years that the opportunity to figure out where the alignments are and how we align with each other. But it's also forced us to say, with this uneconomic market and a small population, we have to be globally relevant. We have to be global traders. And of course, if we're turning this into a history podcast, the essence of Canadian history is being the quintessential trading nation. And it's absolutely true in this industry of the future as well. And we are a tiny fragment of the global market. And it's true of any successful life sciences company today. One of the odd things is we don't really care about the domestic market. It's about the global market. And so I think from an industry perspective, we've always had to be globally relevant. And from a research perspective, I mean, that's one of the extraordinary qualities of research people, is that they're only really interested in what is the best going on in the world, and how does their work stack up against others in the world. So I think that is it's kind of part of the beautiful combination in Canada that again speaks to the potential that we have. This inherent part of being Canadian and this inherent part of being a researcher. You have to understand the global connections and figure out how to make them. And again, I look at the work that you lead with your colleagues at CGEn, and I think about looking around the board table with some extraordinary colleagues from around the world, and you and the scientific directors deliberately set out to say, yeah, we want important Canadian focus, but we absolutely want to have focus around the table that is global and globally relevant. And I think it's been to the credit of the organization.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. Yeah, I couldn't agree more that it's not for the victory lap, time for victory lap. Yeah, we have plenty to do. So on that point, to continue to get there and to get there, obviously everybody wants to get wherever they want to do quicker. This is just the lot of time we live in. What as a country should we be doing better or differently? I mean, we are doing a lot of good stuff, but in your opinion, what do you see we could do slightly better or a lot better or differently to fast track that and become more cohesive and more sustainable as a innovation network?
So I think that's a really important question, and I again will come at it from an industry perspective because nobody would accuse me of having any expertise from a research enterprise or an academic perspective. Although I think there is a lot of good work and a lot of good thought going into how to make those incredible research institutes even stronger and the funding mechanisms more effective. Both from a perspective of output and diversity, which is incredibly important to the quality of research work being done. So from an industry perspective, seems to me there are a couple of things that we really need to think about. And again, as we've said along the way in this discussion, Naveed, the data will guide the conversation. If you look at the investments in life sciences in 2020 and 2021, each of those years broke previous records. Huge capital investment going into the space. And 2021 broke the record on a combined basis for a number of previous years. So it's just extraordinary. It's great news. You look at it a little more closely and you say to yourself, okay, but only 10% of that capital came from inside Canada. So that, and again, you can't be naive. In the United States, especially from a public markets perspective, will dominate this industry for the foreseeable future. But if we want to have a sustained industry that we have domestically, where we have domestically all of the key functional expertise, continuing to build the Canadian venture capital, domestic venture capital industry is absolutely critical. Really, in life sciences, depending on how you want to count it, there are somewhere between 5 and 8 organizations, the largest of which I think has an active spend of a couple $100 million, compared to significant multiples of that number south of the border, and a typical fund being in the multiple billions. So I think there's a real issue there that we've got to pay attention to. You know, again, not being naive, it will be the case in the future that successful companies will get bought up by international players. I think our responsibility as people who want to build the ecosystem is twofold. First, to think about making sure that some of that financial return continues to come back to Canada, to Canadian investors, so that it can be recycled again in other investments, and that's that is well understood and well documented. And the second piece is, at least from our perspective, and I think it's true for others more directly in the venture capital industry in Canada, we want to find organizations to invest in where there is a uniquely Canadian expertise and a uniquely Canadian competitive advantage, or maybe it's not exclusively Canadian, but it's a uniquely competitive advantage that the company will continue to be in Canada, even if the ownership ends up being somewhere else. So, you know, you look at some of our portfolio companies, and you'll recognize Canadian leadership in antibody drug conjugates, for example, as an area where that relies on some domestic expertise that should prove sticky, I think is the technical term, in the future, regardless of where the ownership are. Or, you know, we've recently made a significant foray into radiopharmaceuticals, as have others in Canada. Fusion Pharmaceuticals in Ontario as well is a great example, where there is domestic infrastructure that means almost certainly the company ends up remaining here. Or if you look at our colleagues at Repair Therapeutics, who are our anchor tenant in our facility in Montreal, clearly relying on very strong Canadian expertise to drive that company. So that's probably, to me, the biggest issue that we have to be thoughtful about, because I think the data tell us that the other elements of building the ecosystem are coming along very effectively.
Yeah, great. And I was going to actually go there. I was going to ask you, some of the impact of the life science sector on the economic growth of Canada. So you've already touched on that, so which is great. I think I'm looking at the time in the last few minutes. One thing, it would be amiss if I don't ask you, and I wish I had more time, but what is the cost of missing out?
Well, I mean, haven't we lived the cost of missing out over the course of the last 2 years? I mean, it's a little bit cheeky because both of us have been privileged to work in organizations over the course of the last 2 years that could make significant contributions to the pandemic and Canada's response and recovery from the pandemic. That said, I think we've seen public policymakers, frankly, do an admirable job of very aggressively trying to address historical investment lapses in the ecosystem over time. How's that for diplomatic? So the biomanufacturing capacity that governments across the country have very aggressively pursued, and we see significant investments in biomanufacturing in Accelera and Precision Nanosystems in Vancouver, or with BioVectra in Atlantic Canada, where I'm a director. And amongst many others, I think we've seen significant contributions there. So I think we've lived through the cost of missing out. And I'll also say a number of organizations, including our own, have thought a lot about where do we have to pivot to continue to support that biomanufacturing capacity. So as you may know, we did a partnership recently with the Canadian Alliance for Skills Training and Life Sciences, CASL, which is brought to Canada the gold standard in biomanufacturing training. Incredibly important. There's a huge demand and a huge delta in qualified biomanufacturing personnel. So that's a bit of a pivot we've made. But I guess the candid response is, we've lived through it over the course of the last 2 years, and we've seen some of the challenges if we don't make these investments. And I'd also say, B, again, going back to my history lesson, Canada was established as the proverbial hewers of wood and drawers of water. And if we continue to do that in research terms, in making extraordinarily publicly funded research discoveries and advancements to a certain point, and then hand those off to somebody else globally to advance and do the hard work of developing and reap the economic benefits of that development, then I think we'll end up as hewers of wood and drawers of intellectual capacities as well. And that would be an awful shame in my view, especially when there's such an extraordinary opportunity. We're making such great advances in exploiting that opportunity, and we're doing it in a uniquely Canadian way that serves the interests of Canadians and global citizens, literally around the world.
Yeah, and absolutely right, Gordon. And I have no doubt in my mind that we'll continue to do that. It's more the focus on how do we accelerate, how do we do more. So absolutely. Well, Gordon, as always, it's been a fascinating discussion, and I wish I had more of your time and more time to do this. Perhaps in a little while, we'll do a part 2 with Gordon McCauley on our part.
I'm happy to do it if you're crazy enough to invite me back. I mean, you were kind enough to tell people what to do if they wanted to follow me. What do they do if they don't want to follow me? That's probably far more important to know.
No, I don't think that will be the case. So Okay. Look, thank you very much, Gordon.
My pleasure.
Fascinating discussion. Thanks for your time again, and we'll be in touch.
Terrific. Take care. Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers. Bye.